pressure in your brain is directly pressurizing or putting pressure on the medulla, the cardiac center. And that's leading to the issue of increased blood pressure. Is that what you just said? I think that's what you just said, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, but I'm trying not to assume that increased ICP is always going to, I think it's just the nature of where your swelling occurs. You might have a bleed in your front part of your brain, but it's going to displace your squishy little brain back, and it's going to cause pressure on your doula.
Okay. Anyone have agreement or disagreement with either of those?
I think the squishing of your medulla is why we have the Shane Stokes.
Yeah, but the increases systolic blood pressure.
Well, and that's why your body is not.
The brain starts pushing through the foramen ovale or whatever.
Yeah. I think I agree with you.
Because it's
And your cranial pressure would put pressure on the
Go for it, Andrew.
respiratory side of the brain. Which
Jump in.
causes
That's I think is
Andrew.
more than irregular.
So there's like a cerebral perfusion pressure that has to be overcome in order for cerebral.
What is it? Seems like you
20?
said it. Not what number is it, how do you get it? It's an equation.
It's on our last
The
time.
internet knows.
The internet knows?
Intracranial pressure
Yeah,
Minus
the pressure going up.
blood pressure.
Maybe.
yeah, we can figure it out.
Blood pressure minus.
So it's the intracranial pressure,
MAP.
yeah, minus the,
ICP.
MAP minus A.
oh, I had it backwards. So mean arterial pressure minus.
Okay.
So there's a pressure that needs to be overcome in order for the brain to be perfused. So when you can't overcome that pressure, then the brain's not being perfused. So it's not getting oxygen.
Okay, so let's start here.
To increase in ICP.
Use these terms so I understand what it is that you're saying.
Okay.
So you're saying this is necessary for what?
For your brain to be perfused.
Okay, so this is called the cerebral perfusion pressure. And another way for you to say that is the pressure at which the cerebrum, brain, is perfused. We're all clear on the word perfusion, yes? Okay, so the cerebral perfusion pressure, go on.
So when you increase the intracranial pressure, then you need a greater mean arterial pressure to overcome the increase of ICP.
Okay? In order to have this.
Yes.
That's just a straight equation. You all get that, right? Okay? Okay, so go on.
So
If I have a mean arterial pressure of 90 and an intracranial pressure of 70, right? Let's change that. An intracranial pressure of 40, then my cerebral perfusion pressure would be
50.
50. We're just using numbers, yes?
Could you put the equation up for mean arterial pressure?
Didn't put it up.
I said, would you?
What is the equation for mean arterial pressure?
2 times your diastolic plus your systolic.
Systolic is 1/3, diastolic is 2/3. Whatever that is. In the middle.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that.
Okay,
It's on our
so
refrigerator
some of you need to go back and look at your mean arterial pressure. Let's go back to this. Continue on, Andrew.
So when you have a greater ICP that you have to overcome, then the body tries to vasoconstrict in order to create a higher mean arterial pressure. So to overcome it, so that the brain can be perfused.
Okay. Do you all understand what Andrew's saying so far? Do you all agree with what Andrew's saying so far? So we need to break that down and do this slower, but faster.
Yeah.
So, why might we have an increase in intracranial pressure?
Bleed.
There's
Swelling.
increased fluid in the
Increased
cranial
fluid.
cavity.
Due to what?
Head injury.
Head injury.
So we might have a head injury that is causing a bleed. Good? And it's not just a head injury, it's what kind of a head injury?
What if there was a,
Yes.
wait, what if there was a tumor?
What's that?
If there was like a tumor?
It's a closed head injury.
Thank you. So it's a closed head injury, because if we're an open head injury, we wouldn't necessarily be getting that increase in intracranial pressure for a while. So we've got a closed head injury, an internal head injury, that is hemorrhagic, that's bleeding sometimes, yes? So now we are increasing intracranial pressure. What is happening as we increase the intracranial pressure in this person?
The blood pressure.
They're
Blood
not
pressure is-
perfusing the brain
Because what?
because the intracranial pressure is greater than their mean arterial pressure. Or, you know,
significantly greater.
they can't overcome,
Cerebral.
yeah, they can't create enough cerebral fusion pressure.
Okay, so intracranial pressure. I'm going to say it this way, I don't fully mean it this way. So, bear with me. Intracranial pressure is exceeding the mean arterial pressure. I don't actually mean that intracranial pressure gets larger than the mean arterial pressure necessarily, but it gets close enough to the mean arterial pressure that we don't have enough cerebral perfusion pressure to be perfusing the brain. It doesn't have to be that ICP is greater than MAP. It just has to be that ICP is close enough to MAP that we are not perfusing the brain.
Less than
Does that make sense? There's not enough difference. So just, I'm doing this for ease, and ICP can rise above mean arterial pressure, but when I say this, I really just mean that it's above the point at which the cerebral perfusion pressure is happening. So therefore, we have a cerebral perfusion pressure that is inadequate. Okay?
Is
Then,
there,
yes,
is ICP when it's in a normal human, it's a constant, right?
it fluctuates throughout the day, and it fluctuates, not by much, but it fluctuates a little bit, just like your mean arterial pressure fluctuates a little bit as blood flow is ebbing and flowing.
But it should be relatively consistent.
But it's, for the most part, reasonably constant, just because your brain only has so much room in there, and you don't usually have an increase in blood flow. So when you start running in place,
Me?
yes,
Yeah, cool.
or walking in place,
I'm doing
you're
that.
moving your legs up and down, so we can all see your legs moving up and down.
That's happening right now.
Oh my God. Or arms, or there we go, excellent.
Good
Her-
job,
there you
yeah.
go. Her muscles are starting to demand more blood flow for the activity they're doing, yes? Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain already takes its max blood flow all the time. So there's nothing that actually delivers more blood to your brain, because just because it's reallocating what portions of your brain are being used, it's not being used more. And there's this thing that went around probably when you were a kid, like an Einstein quote or something that said most people only use about 10% of their brain or something like that. Do you remember that? It's BS, right? When they're talking about that, they're talking about intellectual capabilities and such. They're not talking about the actual amount of neuronal movement in your brain. Your brain is used all the time.
That's
It's
like
just-
the
it's-
whole premise of the Lucy movie.
Just saying. It's just a matter of what's being allocated at any given time in your brain, right? So your brain is already taking most of the oxygen that's delivered to it from those red blood cells and the glucose that's coming and the nutrients that's coming. It's already doing that. So we don't, as you do different activities, you don't allocate a larger supply of blood to the brain like you do to skeletal muscle, all right? So for all intents and purposes, throughout your day, you don't have a great fluctuation in the amount of blood flow that is coming to and leaving your brain. It stays relatively constant, and therefore your ICP is reasonably constant for the most part.
How
as
do
well.
you know that?
How do we know what? How do I know that, or how
Yeah.
do humans know that?
No, how do you, humans. We'll go with humans.
Because research has been done on how much blood flow is going to brains.
Okay.
We can, that's easy. We can watch how much blood flow goes to brains during different activities and see that it doesn't decrease.
Okay.
How do vasodilators affect that? Does your brain just not really get affected by
It does.
vasodilators, or?
No, your brain does get affected by that, and the answer to this will answer that as well.
Great.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Okay, back to Andrew.
Yeah.
So, we have an ICP that has increased to the point where cerebral perfusion pressure is inadequate. Why is cerebral perfusion pressure inadequate? Give me this increase in intracranial pressure, what's it doing to make cerebral perfusion pressure inadequate, other than using these words, but like the physical act, what is happening?
So the blood isn't flowing into the cells and carrying oxygen.
Because why?
Because the only way that it moves into cells is with the, well.
What is
pressure.
this, what is this going to physically cause?
Ischemia.
Before that,
Less blood to get to the brain.
Or
say that again,
Less blood to get to the brain.
why?
Because
Because
it has
it's-
to overcome a pressure.
It's a container.
Because
it's
it's-
so big and you've already got.
It's swelling and
Suprasagittal sinus is so full it's flattening all the veins and I think it's
Veins?
artery.
Thank you, okay, so we have enough pressure from that intracranial pressure that is exceeding the mean arterial pressure, and therefore the arterioles are simply being flattened, right? So we are decreasing arterial blood flow. Good? Okay. Which is causing what?
Can we go back over how they get flattened?
Yes, you have intracranial pressure. Well, we can go one step further. This increase in intracranial pressure
Yes.
is, that's anywhere in the brain
And
due
it's making
to
it so
blood
that the
flow.
blood flow can't go up
Okay.
and in.
That blood flow, we're gonna have a series of changes in pressure, some of which are irrelevant here, but I'm gonna say them anyway. So this increase in that pressure inside your brain is going to increase the pressure being placed on your cerebral spinal fluid.
Uh-huh.
The increase in pressure that's being placed on the cerebral spinal fluid will increase the pressure being placed on the arterioles from outside the arterioles,
Okay.
right? So you've got an arteriole right here, you have this big mass of blood, you have your meninges with cerebral spinal fluid, pressure's being placed there, pressure's being placed there, pressure's being placed there,
Okay, thank you.
which causes those to flatten.
And greater pressure needed to overcome.
But we're not there yet.
Gotcha.
Blood flow's going this way, we have flattened arterioles, so therefore this mass of brain cells becomes, well, I don't know which one we said, yeah, okay. Becomes a scheme. Do we see that?
mhm.
So arterial blood flow is going to reduce, which is going to cause ischemia. What is ischemia?
Lack of oxygen.
Lack of blood, lack of oxygen.
I still haven't heard the answer yet. What is ischemia? I've heard parts of the answer, but I haven't heard the answer. What's that?
No, that's perfusion.
It's anoxia.
What you mean?
Say again?
Anoxia of the brain.
I still haven't heard the complete answer. Remember we had this talk about, we defined two different words
Uh-huh.
that were a little bit different. We defined these words, right? We defined hypoxia, and we defined ischemia.
So it's not
Damage to the
that
brain cells?
it's not that there isn't oxygen in the blood. The blood can't get to that spot. There's oxygen.
Okay, so I need you to
So
give,
lack
give
of
me- give
blood
me two-
flow to those brain cells, preventing oxygen to get to them.
Okay. Yes, that's
Hypoxia.
let's take this compound sentence and break it down
Yeah.
to something simple.
Feel free.
What becomes ischemia? When we use the word ischemia, we are referring to what kind of bodily tissue?
Cells.
A cell, okay. So when a cell is ischemic, we are saying that that cell is hypoxic because, well, I'll put my because down here,
Lack of blood flow.
of a lack of blood flow. Yeah, you guys gotta be really clear on the difference in hypoxia and ischemia and what that actually means. When you use the word ischemia, it is telling you that there's a blood flow problem that is causing the hypoxia in those cells. Does that make sense? That's really important, because there's other reasons why a cell can be hypoxic. And the solution might be completely different, right? A hypoxic cell is solved by increasing the oxygenation of that cell. But if blood flow is not the problem, then you have to oxygenate it some other way. If blood flow is the problem, then you have to do something to increase blood flow. So in this case, the problem is related to blood flow. Do we agree?
Yes.
Are we there? Everybody's there? Okay, so the tissue becomes ischemic. What else is happening besides the tissue becoming ischemic? Or what's next? Or give me something that's happening next in line.
Would the systolic blood pressure go up to compensate for that?
So ischemia just causes increases in blood pressure?
Ischemia leads to pain.
The lack of blood flow.
It's still lack of oxygen in the brain cells.
It's going to do what?
Is going to cause the body to increase its demand. I mean, it wants to increase perfusion. So
Sure, it wants to. How? What's it doing?
the chemoreceptors for oxygen.
Okay, what are those going to do?
Try and oxygenate, put more
Signal to
oxygen in the blood
medulla to-
with increased respiration.
Signal
So-
to.
That's not the oxygen's fault.
Vasoconstrict.
So I'm hearing a whole bunch of things, and some of which seem kind of accurate within the picture, but we're still not there. You have an ischemic cell in the brain. You have an ischemic set of tissue in the brain. What's that going to do?
So the first thing the brain's going to do is try to vasoconstrict so that it can increase the pressure.
The brain's going to vasoconstrict?
Well,
How does the brain vasoconstrict?
Wouldn't
Sending messages.
wouldn't it vasodilate to try and bring more blood into the area?
It's going to vasodilate?
Well, you're gonna get systemic vasoconstriction to increase pressure, but why it does that, I don't know.
You need to know. And I
Yeah.
think you do know. I think the information is in there.
So the.
You just have to give it somehow.
Yeah, I believe that. So is the chemoreceptors for oxygen triggering some part of the brain to
What
cause
part of the brain?
that?
The medulla
again,
oblongata.
No,
Medulla?
you know.
Is
What
it the
part of the
medulla?
brain? Yeah, why would it be triggering the medulla?
Because that's what triggers the heart and lungs.
Okay, so we have ischemic tissue that is occurring. And that ischemic tissue, through our chemoreceptors, is going to increase our chemoreceptor activity. That is going to signal what?
The medulla?
Medulla oblongata. And why the medulla?
So that's our center that controls respiratory and heart rate.
Be more specific. How does it control, just generally speaking, respiratory and whatever you just said?
Through giving neurotransmitters
Cranial nerve?
with adrenaline or with epinephrine, norepinephrine, and
Can you say it
acetylcholine.
in a system? Can you tell me what system we're getting?
The sympathetic system, the
Parasympathetic central
Can you
nervous
use a,
system?
go up one level?
Autonomic nervous system?
Okay,
Autonomic.
so we're gonna be doing something with the autonomic nervous system, because the control of the autonomic nervous system is found within the medulla. Do you get that so far?
Yep.
Okay. So, what does ischemic brain tissue, I'm now backing up to maybe evolutionary times for a moment. What does ischemic brain tissue signify globally to the brain?
Danger.
That what?
Danger?
Okay, danger, yes. In terms of words that we've used here, what does ischemic brain tissue signify? Prior to death. It's signifying a problem. What's that problem?
hypoxia.
Okay.
Lack of oxygen. Too specific.
Yes, and how does the brain,
Draw
how
a
does the
picture.
brain, how does the brain get the oxygen?
Through respiratory
What's the problem?
drive.
Too much waste,
Hypovolemia is what
waste
it thinks it
products.
is.
Okay, so there's a problem with blood flow, yes?
The carbon.
And what delivers, what's the word for a cell getting oxygenation through blood flow?
Perfusion?
Respiration?
No, there's a word we use that signifies blood flow delivering nutrients to a cell.
Is it not gas?
Perfusion, excellent.
Perfusion.
Okay, now we're getting there. So ischemia is signifying what to the brain?
Lack
A
of
lack of perfusion, good. And what does the brain know to control to increase perfusion?
heart rate.
Blood pressure. Systolic.
Nose control.
Breathing.
You guys and your words pressure that come out.
Increased heart rate, or
Sure, it's gonna increase blood pressure. What blood pressure?
systolic.
Nope. What relates to
Central
the
perfusion
brain's
pressure?
ability to have perfusion? What's that?
Central perfusion pressure?
Mean
Cerebral.
There you go. Cerebral perfusion pressure. That's what the brain knows.
I keep saying things like, no, and then somebody else will.
But you said central.
Oh, excuse me, you're right.
That's the difference.
Well, excuse me, you're mad.
Right? So the brain recognizes that ischemia to the brain,
Bless you.
from a global sense, means there's not enough cerebral perfusion pressure. Right? Because if there was enough cerebral perfusion pressure, there shouldn't be a perfusion problem. Good? Okay. So, in order for the brain to increase cerebral perfusion pressure, in order for the brain to increase cerebral perfusion pressure, what mechanism does it have to control?
Mean arterial pressure.
Mean arterial pressure. It has to get the mean arterial pressure up in order to make the cerebral perfusion pressure go up in order to take care of the ischemic problem. Does that make sense? Okay. So from a medullary standpoint, from the medulla, what are these chemoreceptors going to be causing?
Vasoconstriction.
These chemoreceptors cause vasoconstriction. So these chemoreceptors in the brain, when they're activated off of ischemia, cause the blood vessels to constrict.
No.
Medulla sends a neurotransmitter.
The medulla sends a neurotransmitter. Hey, tell me what's happening here. You guys know
You
this.
said if
This
it's-
part of it you know.
If it's the autonomic nervous system, then
Give me information about
you'll
that.
you'll get a response that
So
a
if we activate the autonomic nervous system, we get vasoconstriction.
can.
That's one option.
Say that again. Okay, so much like blood pressure, you can't just globally say autonomic.
Yes.
You have to be specific. So what are these chemoreceptors causing?
An increase in mean arterial pressure?
An increase in sympathetics.
Oh,
Increases some. So really.
And what else? And what else besides this? An increase in the sympathetic nervous system
Decrease in
and a
parasympathetic.
decrease in the parasympathetic.
We know this stuff, Kyle. He's right.
An increase in the sympathetic and the decrease in the parasympathetic, right? Because what is going to increase mean arterial pressure? We're back to, did anyone figure out what the mean arterial pressure equation is?
Systolic blood pressure
Is equal to what?
is equal to 2 times the diastolic blood pressure. Oh, wait, sorry.
2/3.
Systolic blood pressure plus 2 times diastolic divided by 3. Systolic blood pressure
Systolic
plus
Plus
parentheses 2 times diastolic blood pressure.
diastolic blood pressure. I don't need parentheses because you multiply before addition, but that's beside the point.
And that whole equation divided by 3.
Okay, systolic blood pressure plus 2 times the plus 2/3 the diastolic blood pressure. 1/3 the systolic blood pressure and 2/3 the diastolic blood pressure. Okay, so if we want to increase the mean arterial pressure, now I'm asking you a more general question. I'll get back to the specifics. What has to be increased to increase mean arterial pressure?
Systolic and diastolic.
Systolic and diastolic. Good? So a decrease in the parasympathetic nervous system and an increase in the sympathetic nervous system would be a help, right? Because blood pressure in general is equal to what?
An increase in blood pressure is an increase in mean
It's an
arterial
equation.
pressure.
Equal to.
Oh, it's,
Stroke volume,
Stroke.
cardiac output, and
Cardiac output
Times
vascular resistance.
times peripheral vascular resistance. And we can break up cardiac output, right, which is what?
stroke volume.
Stroke volume.
Times heart rate.
Okay, so that's our equation, right? So if we want stroke volume and heart rate. So if we want, generally speaking, blood pressure to go up, then we need to increase these variables. What variable, autonomically, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, is going to increase stroke volume? You only have two answers, sympathetic or parasympathetic.
Increase stroke volume, sympathetic.
What's going to increase heart rate?
Sympathetic.
What's going to increase peripheral vascular resistance?
Parasympathetic.
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system will increase all of the variables that will increase blood pressure, generally speaking, and if all the variables for increasing this blood pressure goes up, then that means our mean arterial pressure only has one option. It has to go up. Right?
Yes.
Consequently, what would lower any of these? What would lower heart rate, for example?
Parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic. Does that have a direct consequence to stroke volume?
Yes.
Does the parasympathetic innervate the myocardial
No.
contractile cells, causing a decrease in contractibility?
No.
No, so does that have a direct effect on that?
No.
Will it have an indirect effect on
Yes.
that? Yes. Does it directly cause vasodilation to occur?
Parasympathetic?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So the parasympathetic system, if it's activated, would do what to our blood pressure, generally speaking?
Drop it.
Which would do what to our mean arterial pressure?
Drop it.
Which defeats the purpose of taking care of the ischemia. So when we have ischemic tissue activating chemoreceptors that are sending signals to the medulla, it's sending signals to cause what? It's on the board, so just say it.
Increase in sympathetic system, decrease in parasympathetic.
Great. An increase in sympathetics and a decrease in parasympathetics. Is everybody with me so far? Does
Yes.
this all make sense so far? Okay. Increases in sympathetic and decreases in parasympathetic is going to cause what?
Increase in blood pressure, mean arterial pressure, and an increase in
It
heart.
increases blood pressure? Sympathetics increase blood pressure?
By increasing the heart rate,
So increase stroke volume, increase heart rate.
What does the sympathetic system do? Does it increase blood pressure?
No,
What does
indirectly.
it do?
Secondary.
Yeah, so the increase in blood pressure is secondary to things that it does.
okay, it's going to increase your heart rate.
Okay, so it's going to increase heart rate. Great. What else? It's going to
Increase
increase
contractibility.
contractility. What else is it going to do?
Increase peripheral vascular resistance.
It's going to increase peripheral vascular resistance.
Or deep.
No, it doesn't decrease it because it wants more blood in your muscles.
What does the sympathetic do to blood vessels?
Constrict.
So what does the sympathetic system do?
Constrict.
So it doesn't cause an increase in peripheral vascular resistance. It does what?
Increases peripheral vascular.
What does it do?
Increases.
It constricts blood vessels.
Oh,
We hope that the net result, therefore, is then resistance going up.
gotcha. I see what you're
But
saying.
resistance going up has to do with how much blood is present there as well, right? It's not doing anything with blood being there, it's just doing things with the size of the tube. So it's going to increase vasoconstriction. Are we good so far? So an increase in heart rate, contractility is going to be related to stroke volume. An increase in heart rate, an increase in stroke volume, and an increase in vasoconstriction should result in what?
Increase mean arterial pressure.
An increase in our MAP. Yes?
Yes.
And that should be done via an increase in what?
Blood pressure. Systolic.
Systolic blood pressure. And
Increase in diastolic.
we also should have an increase in diastolic blood pressure too, for that matter.
You're right, Mark. Look at that.
Right? We should have an increase in both.
Not yet.
Oh, increase. Oh. Oh.
Are we good so far? So far.
So far.
Okay,
So we
so can we correct this for a moment?
have hypertension. Yes.
What can we say about that?
Increase in systolic and increase in diastolic.
Okay, with an increase in diastolic. Is this still true?
Yes.
So what does that mean? If that is still true, what does that mean about these two things?
So systolic increases more than the diastolic.
Okay, so the stroke volume thing and the heart rate for that matter have a higher effect in terms of which of the blood pressures is being affected at any given time. So we do still see that widening of the pulse pressure because the systolic is gonna go up higher than the diastolic. The systolic variable, within blood pressure, the systolic variable is the most readily changeable one because it's immediately affected by the heart rate and the stroke volume, which can dramatically have acute changes versus vasoconstriction and arterial constriction. That vascular constriction only has so much ability to change the overall pressure in any given moment. So we do see increases in the diastolic, but we see dramatic increases in the systolic. We good so far?
One of three.
Do you see the complete triad here?
No, just the.
No, in fact, what do you notice?
Opposite.
That's opposite
The
of
heart rate
the,
goes up.
Yeah, you got one problem here that's opposite, right?
yes.
With that heart rate issue. So that does pose a little bit of a hassle, right? Because the triad is related to a decrease in heart rate, not an increase in heart rate.
So
The
But aren't you
reflex, stage one of the reflex will have an increase in the heart rate.
until it puts too much
Stage
pressure.
one of the reflex?
Yes,
Yeah.
the first stage of Cushing's reflex begins with an increase in that heart rate. Because we have ischemic
Wait.
tissue that's trying to increase that pressure, yes.
Are you saying that the Cushing's reflex is synonymous with Cushing's triad?
No, I am saying Cushing's triad is a part of Cushing's reflex. Cushing's reflex is larger. Cushing's reflex is everything that's happening during increases in intracranial pressure. And at the very end of that, we see Cushing's triad. We're just not there yet. We're getting there.
We're at stage one.
You look confused. Help me change that
I'm
confusion.
not confused, I was just really wrong. in
Why?
my-
Were you using those synonymously?
No, I
Okay.
thought Cushing's reflex was like the normal response of a healthy individual compensating for ICP and managing it. thought it was like normal.
I'll change when you say healthy response. If you have increases in intracranial pressure, it's not really a healthy response. But at the same time, yes, the Cushing's reflex is the reflex that we get when you increase intracranial pressure.
Yeah, and I thought it was like peachy keen. I thought the triad is where you're like, oh, homie, like,
Yeah, I would argue that it is peachy.
Death is
What did you
imminent.
say, peachy?
Peachy keen.
I would agree that it's peachy keen.
Stage one.
I just watched, what is it, The Outsiders with my son.
that is
So-
such a good movie.
So peachy keen is perfect right now.
Okay.
None of you know what that is. Ponytail, soda pop.
I know.
So from a small change in ICP, the reflex is great, because this is exactly what it does, and this should result in what?
Increased perfusion.
We should increase in cerebral perfusion pressure, and everything should go back to normal. Fantastic. Unfortunately, we don't just have this transient momentary increase in intracranial pressure. What do we have?
A bleed, a continuous bleed.
We have a bleed that is keeping intracranial pressure high and making it worse, because what happens as we increase blood flow to the brain?
It gets worse.
More leaks out, right? So in this case, we went from Cushing's reflex that should be a negative feedback loop to ICP due to an injury, which is what? A positive feedback loop, which creates a problem. Positive feedback loops that are not intertwined with the negative feedback loop will always lead to the organism's death, every single time. You can never have a positive feedback loop that doesn't end in the organism's death unless it is injected inside a negative feedback loop. Unless it's what? Absolutely not. What happens in birth?
Well, isn't it like positive?
Until when?
Until baby's pushed
until
out.
the baby's pushed out. So from the grander scheme, that baby coming out is the negative feedback loop. Because what happens if we, don't take this the wrong way, if we cork it up, if we sew it up and she's in labor, what's gonna happen?
It's gonna continue to build and build and build and build
Until
and
when?
build until something pops.
Until they're dead, baby and mom are dead. We have to allow the baby to come out. That's the negative part. So you're right, labor to delivery is a positive feedback loop until it results in the delivery. And that's the negative component. We never talk about that being the negative component because we just talk about until the moment that the baby comes out. It's the same thing with the clotting cascade. That's a positive feedback loop, but you have to stop the clotting, yes? So the negative feedback loop is built within the clot itself as it's broken down and new tissue is laid down. Make sense? Shock is a positive feedback loop.
Yep.
Okay? So this should take care of this. I'm back to Annalise, you, thinking that reflex is a good thing because it is. Because this should do this, which should feed back to this, which would make this what?
The negative part of the feedback loop.
Yeah, it would make this go away.
Confusion.
That's the Cushing's reflex loop that's good. But that's not where we're at with Cushing's reflex in this case. We're up here to this problem right here. This is going to do what to this,
Make it worse.
which is going to do what to this,
Increase it more.
which is going to do what to this,
Increase it
Even
more.
more.
which is going to do what to this,
Increase it more.
Decrease it
Decrease.
more.
which
Decrease
is
it.
going to do what to this.
Increase.
Increase.
What are we in?
Now you're in an infarction.
We're in a positive feedback loop. Right? And that's where
Don't
Cushing's
disagree with you.
reflex will do a detriment to us because it'll continue until we see these signs, which we have labeled triad. Does that make sense, the relationship between Cushing's reflex versus Cushing's triad there?
Would that increase in ischemic tissue lead to an infarct?
In the brain?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right? Is that key words there? Okay, so here we are. This increase in mean arterial pressure, this increase in systolic blood pressure, and this increase in the diastolic blood pressure, so this increase in MAP, plus the increase in heart rate, and yes?
If you have an open head injury, would you see the first stage of Cushing's reflex?
You could, because as you start to build and before the brain is pushed out of whatever it is that it's coming out of, we would still see the sympathetic response because we will have a transient increase in intracranial pressure. That will then increase our mean arterial pressure to make sure that that cerebral perfusion pressure is maintained. And in doing so, the brain kind of gets a herniation and pushed out, right? Of whatever that open skull is. But because we have room for the brain to expand, we don't see that huge increase in intracranial pressure continue to grow until it's very late, right? Okay. So this increase in the mean arterial pressure and this increase in heart rate, vasoconstriction, all of this stuff that we're going to see is going to, I've already said it, but that's going to cause what?
Further increase in your intracranial pressure.
Okay, it's going to cause a further increase in bleeding and intracranial pressure. Do we agree?
Mhm.
So we're going to see increases in intracranial pressure. But something else is also happening simultaneous to that, which is what? You're shaking your head up and down, so what is?
Are you talking about the next stage in Cushing's reflex, or are you talking about something more?
I'm not talking about anything, I'm just telling you something else is happening here. And if that makes us go to the next step, that's great.
Well, I was gonna start talking about why there's a decrease in heart rate.
Is there a decrease in heart rate right now?
I don't think we're here yet.
Sure, not yet.
Let's find out. What's happening? What do you think's happening now?
The increase
Oh,
of
God.
pressure on the
What's happening
medulla.
here?
Well, since there's a greater increase in, we talked about how it's a positive feedback mechanism, right? So more ICP is going to cause less perfusion to the brain, so it's just going to keep going and going and going.
Great. What else is happening?
Okay, so your body isn't actually like hypovolemic. So there's a whole bunch, so as you're increasing the mean arterial pressure, there's a lot of pressure going up into your aortic bodies. And so those baroreceptors are saying like, there's way too much, the pressure keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. And so it triggers a response that causes the heart rate to lower.
So what is that trigger? What's it doing? Be specific.
Let's go with the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right here? So this initial pressure is affecting the parasympathetic system?
No.
What's it doing?
The intracranial pressure is affecting the medulla oblongata. I mean, like, so those chemoreceptors are still activating
Great.
the medulla.
Sure, we can go from this back to this same system. You've already discussed that being a positive feedback loop.
Oh, yeah.
So now is there something different? You've already talked about it. You just weren't specific.
Baroreceptors.
What about it?
So it's increasing the pressure in the baroreceptors. And
It's
with
increasing the
that
what?
stretch.
Thank you,
Stretch.
Blake's got that. It's
And
increasing
with
the
that
stretch.
increased stretch, it says, hey, I don't have to work so hard, so it decreases heart rate.
Okay, so we're increasing baroreceptor stretch. Do you all understand what's being said right there? We are increasing heart rate and stroke volume, which is increasing cardiac output. As you increase cardiac output into the aorta and into the carotid arteries towards the carotid bodies, you are increasing the amount of stretch that is happening on those baroreceptors. Does that make sense? They are being flattened out. If you increase the baroreceptor, so this, the increase in intracranial pressure, those are repeat signs for you musicians in here, is just going to repeat all of this. That's what that is going to try to do. This is doing something different. If we increase our baroreceptor stretch, what's that going to result in?
That results in the parasympathetic response.
What's it result in? Be specific.
You know you're wrong when he says that.
Help. Additional resources.
You're in there by yourself.
Additional resources.
We got this, Andrew.
What's that baroreceptor stretch going to do?
Decrease the heart rate?
Why?
Those receptors affect the heart rate?
It would send a message to the medulla oblongata, which would then
Oh, so they don't affect the heart rate.
They do, but
They
indirectly.
do?
Indirectly.
What do they directly do?
Send a message to the medulla.
Okay, so this is going to send a message to the medulla. That's what they do.
I think the medulla's getting confused at this point.
And within the medulla, what are those signals trying to do? Activate the parasympathetic nervous system and
Decrease the sympathetic.
and try to decrease the sympathetic nervous system. Now we have a bit of a problem here, don't we? Right? Because we've got this increase in intracranial pressure. Let me highlight some things here. You have this increase in intracranial pressure, right? That is doing that. But you have this increase in baroreceptor stuff that's doing this. Do you see some confusion there?
Yes.
Okay. So this confusion is an interesting point of confusion. There are things that the parasympathetic system and sympathetic system both activate and innervate, and there are some things that are only innervated by the parasympathetic system, and some things that are only innervated by the sympathetic system. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we talk about the intersection, what are things related to what we're talking about today that they both have interaction on?
Heart rate.
They both have interaction on heart rate. Sympathetic drives it up, parasympathetic system drives it down. What else do they both have? We didn't even put it up here yet, but it's one other thing within the heart that it has that they both have interaction on.
The AV node?
Yeah, which what word do we normally associate with that? It starts with a C.
Contractility?
No.
Is the AV node anything
Conduction.
about
No.
contractility?
Conduction.
Conduction. So the sympathetic does what to conduction?
It increases it.
Increase it. And the parasympathetic system does what to conduction?
Decreases.
Decreases it. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems affect heart rate and conduction. There is intersection there. Does the parasympathetic system directly innervate the ventricular myocardial contractile cells?
No.
No.
So that doesn't do anything to the contractile portion of it, right? Good?
Yes.
What about blood vessels? How widespread is the sympathetic system's activation of blood vessels to cause constriction?
Through the whole body.
How widespread is the parasympathetic system's activation to cause dilation of blood vessels?
Through the whole body.
Yeah, it's really not a whole
Oh.
lot. It does do that, but it's not a huge activator of all those things. We do, it does. It does. But from a stress standpoint, the sympathetic activation of blood vessels is much, much stronger than the parasympathetic system's activation. Does that make sense? Okay. We're not even going to get into the confusion. At some point in time, you can go into my office in the back corner and look on my wall, and you can see a drawing that's on the NTS and the medulla oblongata and the interactions between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system within the medulla. I'm going to give you a paper also to read about it. There's a massive interaction between those two systems within the medulla. In other words, one of the things that happens when we want to activate something or deactivate something, there's an interaction between those two systems. So not only do we have this neurologic effect that is causing an increase in the sympathetic and a decrease in the parasympathetic